Right. As I said, I'm a sucker for technology history, right? And how our civilization has evolved um, over millions of years. So when we talk about human progress all the way to today's digital economy, um, and we look at some seminal points or milestones in our evolution that brought us to where we are today. And if you ask anybody, hey, what are those 4 or 5 things that helped to shape the world as we came out of savannas in Africa? People will say fire. Fire happened about 1.5 million years ago. And fire gave us a lot of good things. It gave us comfort, heat that gives us comfort, keeping the predators away in the night, right? And the ability to cook. And the ability to cook is a phenomenal ability because that meant you didn't have to spend a lot of time eating as animals do, similar sized animals do, right? Now, cooking breaks down the nutrients, makes the absorption much easier. So now human beings had time to think of other pursuits. So to that extent, fire was one of the first seminal points. Then language, which came about 100,000 years ago. Language helped us to collaborate. Before that, we had the sign language, maybe some noises, but language gave symbols to physical things as well as abstract things. Love is very difficult to express in sign language, right? But love symbolizes, is a symbol, the word, for a lot of other things. But this was about 100,000 years ago when language started. But for a long time, language was just spoken. It was only about 3,000, 3,200 years ago, Sumerians invented the first writing. It's called cuneiform. It was symbols still, but written symbols. And the significance of that is now you can transmit this knowledge to people who are not directly present in the conversation. If you and I are doing business, we could now keep records of that business. How many sheep have I sold you and how much money you have paid me, right? And credit could start because I could record over a period of time. So that helped commerce as well. And transferring this knowledge across generations. Now you could have schools where you could bring kids and transfer the knowledge in writing, which they can in turn transfer it to the next generation. So writing was one major milestone, right? And then around 3500 BC in Mesopotamia, the first wheel was invented. Wheel helped in many ways. Prior to the invention of the wheel, the physical labor or the physical effort was limited to what a human being could do. But once wheel came in, transportation, for example, became much easier. Some primitive machines came, for example, to water your fields in agriculture. How do you get water out of a well using some kind of a pulleys and, which are another form of wheels. So that was another flashpoint. And if you come to the modern times, possibly the biggest flashpoint was 1712, the invention of the steam engine. A lot of people, even I, read in my school textbooks that James Watt invented
Hmm.
the steam engine. It's actually a gentleman called Thomas Newcomen. James Watt's steam engine came in 1765. Newcomen's steam engine came in 1712, albeit that steam engine was for a limited purpose of extracting water from coal mines so that the miners could dig deeper. James Watt significantly improved it, added a condenser, made it a more general purpose machine, which gave rise to industrial revolution. But if you look at all these milestones, they've essentially, by and large, increased human productivity, right?
Yes.
In terms of knowledge acquisition or data acquisition, knowledge acquisition, we didn't have any breakthrough seminal points like this, right? So human beings are a very middling creature. We cannot see very far. We cannot smell fine. We cannot hear faint sounds, right? We cannot navigate as well as bats do. Our spectrum of interaction with the world around us is very limited. what we can sense, touch, see, feel, and so on. And this has been the story until a 20-year period, starting in late 1600s, in late 1500s, 1590 was when the first microscope was invented. Now, when you turn the microscope towards the Earth, it was a fascinating revelation. We saw that their cells, their bacteria, their cell structures, their microorganisms, their viruses. Hell, we were living virtually with trillions and trillions of other living forms on this planet that we did not know about, right? And this knowledge acquisition gave rise to developments in biology, chemistry, medicine, and so on and so forth, until today. The second big knowledge acquisition invention happened in 1608, 1609, roughly 20 years after microscope, which was the telescope. Some people say Hans Lippershey invented the telescope in 1608. Some people say Galileo in 1609. Galileo recorded his usage of telescope, so people gravitate towards Galileo. But when you turn the telescope towards the skies, the majesty of the universe, the solar system, the galaxies, right? This cosmos that we were completely unaware of, dots in the sky, and some kind of a imaginary mathematics that went into astrology and some primitive astronomy, and with a lot of respect to humans who did work on the primitive technologies. But telescope literally opened our eyes to the majesty of the universe and told us how insignificant we are in the larger scheme of things, in a way, right? Now, thanks to microscope and telescope, the pace at which knowledge acquisition happened grew very, very rapidly. But to process this, we were still limited by human cognition. How fast can you do compute using a pencil and a paper? We had better frameworks and tools that emerged, such as calculus, Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest human minds that ever lived. But we were still limited by the compute capability of a human brain. All that changed in 1947. AT&T Bell Labs, which is even today fount of innovation. If you talk about US innovation, Xerox is one place where a lot of innovation came from. Bell Labs is the other place where a lot of innovation came from. And in 1947, December, there were three gentlemen who won the Nobel Prize eventually in 1956, invented the first transistor, a semiconductor device that developed into integrated circuits, chips that first powered calculators, and then started powering mainframes, mini computers, desktops, laptops, mobile phones. Everything comes from that semiconductors, right? The first invention in 1947. Now we're able to process a lot of data, store a lot of data, because even memories require semiconductors, right? But we had the next bottleneck. How do you transmit this data, say from San Francisco to Tokyo, right? The latest technology of that time was fax, if you know what fax machines are, right? Or teletext machines, which news agencies use. Now, this was not enough to transmit huge chunks of data. So we started using copper wires, using technologies like DSL to see if we can push a lot more data. We had dial-up connections to begin with, right? Then came a breakthrough in 1966, mind you, approximately 20 years after the invention of the semiconductor, of the transistor. Let me not say semiconductors were known to humans for a little while previously, but the usage in a transistor happened in 47. So 1966, there was a gentleman called Charles Cow who proposed the fiber optics theory. Okay, what we call optical fiber communication. Today, maybe our internet, the home internet also runs on fiber, or Geo fiber, or Airtel fiber, or some other fiber. He got a Nobel Prize for that in 2009. And first practical optical fiber communication was demonstrated by Corning glass. Corning makes a specialist in glasses. If you're using an Android phone or Samsung or Apple, most likely the glass for that comes from Corning, Gorilla Glass. That's the brand name in which they sell. So they demonstrated the first thing. 1977, AT&T laid the first optical fiber in Chicago. And 1998, they laid the first transatlantic submarine cable, now which could transmit terabytes of data in a jiffy, right? Today, we have roughly about 1.5 million kilometers of optical fiber laid just submarine under the seas. Now, 1.5 million kilometers, to put it in context, it can go around the Earth 37 times. Wow. It can go to the moon and come back 2 round trips, 4 trips to the moon and back. That's the amount of optical fiber that we have laid, which is enabling the transmission or high-speed transmission of all this data. What's fascinating to me, and I hope it will be to you as well, SP, is these 4 innovations that I talked about, microscope, telescope, transistors, and optical fiber, all come from the same material, sand, silicon, right? So it's not an exaggeration to say that quite literally, the modern civilization runs on sand, right? So let's quickly, fast forward to what's happening in this century, right? Today, I believe that there are 5 foundational technologies on which our civilization runs. They're semiconductors, process, store, networking, moving data from point A to point B, cloud, because we're generating vast amounts of data, needs to be stored somewhere, analytics, methods, tools, techniques to crunch this vast amounts of data and provide us insights. And for the last 2.5 years, AI. So these are the 5 foundational technologies that I think would run our civilization at least for the next 30, 40 years, before perhaps something like quantum computing becomes mainstream and a new set of applications or use cases or things that we cannot visualize today will come about. But at the core of all these 5 foundational technologies are the data centers. Just like the 20th century economy ran on oil, petroleum, its derivatives, right? The 21st century economy is going to be running on data. Often used cliche, data is the new oil, as they say, right? And just as we never noticed refineries that actually turned crude into petrol or diesel or gasoline or kerosene, data centers are the refineries of the digital world that are actually where the raw data is stored, processed, and transformed into insights. So whether we know it or not, data centers have a very, very critical role in the way our lives run, our businesses run, our interactions run, right? Zoom runs on data centers. Enterprise applications like Zoho or Salesforce or even Gmail, it's all cloud-based. It's all running in a data center somewhere. It's just that we don't realize that. So data centers, because our economy is becoming more and more digital, it's becoming more and more prominent. How large, how many data centers are there in the world? Frankly speaking, nobody knows. We know about private data centers, but the public, government, defense data centers have not even published information. But and data center capacity is measured in the power that they consume, right? In megawatts or gigawatts. So at the end of 2023 or middle of 2024, globally, there was about 55 gigawatts of data center capacity. And it is projected that this 55 gigawatt would become close to 300 gigawatt by 2030 in the next 5 years. almost a 6x growth in the data center capacity. Mind you, it has taken us almost 25 years to build this 55 gigawatt of capacity.
Mm.
And in the next 6 years, 5 years, we're going to be sextupling it, right? So it's a CAGR or annual growth rate of almost 27%. And there is no other $500 billion industry on the planet today that is growing faster than the data center industry, right? Let's come to what is driving this data center. AI is something that everybody talks about. Enterprise workloads, all small, medium, large businesses are moving their workloads, their CRMs, their ERPs, their mail programs, all of them to the cloud, right? Then there is OTT, we spoke about it, the Netflix and the Amazons and all of that. And social media, the Facebooks, the Instas, the WhatsApp, all of them are in the cloud, in a data center somewhere. E-commerce, the Amazons and the Flipkarts, all of them are there in the cloud somewhere. Banking is one of the largest applications that has taken advantage of data centers. All the UPI transactions we do, phone pay transactions we do, all of them reside in a data center somewhere. And increasingly, we see governance moving to the data centers. All the PAN, the Aadhaar, and several other government programs and initiatives, all of them reside in a data center in the cloud, right? So data center is the physical infrastructure. Cloud is abstract layer, a way of visualizing that there is something in the cloud. Okay. So India data centers journey started a little late. Our first data center was built by SIFI in the year 2000. Of course, VSNL, which was erstwhile Tata Communications. It's what is known as Tata Communications today. And I remember an interesting podcast of yours where you had Sanjay Srivastav,
Yes.
and he was mentioning that 30% of global internet is
Yes.
done by Tata Communications infrastructure, something for us to be very proud of in India. But back to what I was saying, um, we started in 2000, and in the last 24 years, we built a capacity of 1.8 gigawatt at the end of 2024, which is roughly 2% of global capacity. But India generates 20% of global data.
Mm.
So we generate 20% of global data, but all of that data is hosted elsewhere, right? So by the year 2030, we believe market analysts are projecting that this capacity will move to 8 gigawatt. There is a lot of investment coming in, and there is a concept called sovereign data centers, which
Mm.
everybody globally is thinking about, that a data generated in a country should reside within the boundaries of that country, right?
Mm.
So if we are consuming or generating and consuming 20% of global data, we should ideally be having 20% of global data center capacity, which means by 2030, we should be having about 60 gigawatt, but we're only talking about 8 gigawatt of projected capacity at this point in time. A lot of room for us to grow. In fact, we have huge smartphone penetration. Roughly about 750 million people use smartphone, more than any other country. We consume 26 GB of data on an average per month, the highest in the world. China consumes 15 GB. US consumes 20 GB. We consume 26 GB. But if you look at data center capacity per million people, US has 2.5 megawatt of capacity,
Mm-hmm.
or 2,500 kilowatts, if you want to call it that. China has 600 kilowatt per million population. We have 100 kilowatt per million population, right? So this is also going to grow possibly close to 30% year over year in the next 5 years. And if the government mandate comes in about data nativity, at this point in time, only the banking industry is required to keep the data in country. But There is no reason why the data that is generated here, whether it's health data or other forms of data or even social media, why it should be residing elsewhere in the country, while it could be residing in here, creating jobs, propelling the local economy. So what is there in a data center? There are broadly three parts. There is IT systems, which is your compute. People call them servers. There is networking, and there is storage. That's the IT part of the data center. Then there is electrical systems, which are very important, that power the data center. And then there is cooling systems, which cool because data centers generate enormous amount of heat. So when we say 55 gigawatt of data center capacity globally, it's also generating 55 gigawatt of heat that needs to be cooled, right? So traditionally in the IT systems, we had CPUs. All of us have heard of Intel and AMD. GPUs. So many people would have heard of NVIDIA, right? These are the two main kinds of processors. There are many other types of processors that go into data centers: DPUs, TPUs, NPUs. We don't need to go into those details. They're very special purpose processors. But broadly, CPUs and GPUs. CPUs are very good for sequential tasking. If there is a sequential task that requires a lot of logic, CPUs are best used for that. GPUs are very good for parallel processing. They have their origins in gaming industry. If you can just visualize in a game, if you're playing, there's a lot of things happening in the background, which can be broken into several parallel tasks. And GPUs were actually the first application for GPUs was in the gaming industry. Now it's becoming relevant in the AI industry, where every task can be broken into hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of parallel tasks. GPU compute is becoming very, very important. But CPUs and GPUs coexist in a data center. So these chips, as I mentioned, are very, very, very hot. Traditionally, data centers have been cooled using air. The same air conditioning that you have in your home, several times larger air conditioners are used in the data centers. But air conditioning or air cooling is not the most efficient way to cool data centers. Here I'll get slightly technical. I'll try to keep it as simple as I can. Energy efficiency in a data center is measured by something called PUE, or power usage effectiveness. Globally, the current PUEs are about 1.6 to 1.65. What that means is to run 1 watt of IT, how much electricity do you need to cool that IT? So when we say 1.6 or 1.65, to run every watt of compute, you need 0.65 watts of energy to cool that compute. Not very efficient. India, it's even worse. It's closer to 1.75, 1.8, right? This is all with air cooling. Liquid, for example, water, is almost 2,500 times more efficient than air when it comes to cooling anything. 2,500 times more efficient.
Simple
Right.
physics rule, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
As somebody told me, if you're boiling a bowl of milk on the gas, you turn the gas on, you dip your finger in the milk, it'll take quite some time for the heat to reach to the top. Whereas if you turn the gas on and put your finger on the flame, right? So air's dissipation versus liquid dissipation, there is a huge difference. So the data center industry is moving towards liquid cooling as a means of cooling, because the processors are becoming hotter and hotter and hotter, right? A typical server may be having 8 processors, let's say, running AI workloads. That could be running about 2,700, definitely closer to 2,000 watts
Right.
of energy and that much amount of heat to be dissipated. So air is not able to do that job, right? Today we are at an era where every processor GPU is almost at 700 watt, right? So we have to move towards liquid cooling, and as I was mentioning, liquid cooling brings down the cooling costs by 90% of a data center and uses lesser energy, gives much better PUE. So all in all, it's good for the environment. It's good for the pressure on the grid. When I say grid, I mean the electric grid, right? Currently, data centers consume almost 2.5% of all electricity used in the world. That's a lot. And if you couple that with the fact that the data center industry is growing at 24-25%, the grid capacities grow only 1%, 2%, 2.5%, right? So there is going to be a mismatch between the power demands of the data centers and what the grids can provide, which is why recently Amazon and Microsoft have gone and started buying and building small modular nuclear reactors so that they can generate their own power. Even in India, some data center operators, for example, Control S, is building a huge 350-acre solar farm so that they can generate their own energy. And I'm sure this is going to be one of the strategies that many data center operators will consider. India, we are, a power deficient country, although there is a lot of investment happening in renewables. Currently, we have about 440 gigawatt of capacity that is installed. Roughly about 236 gigawatt out of that is thermal, and about 125 gigawatt is renewables. Now, well, renewables are good. Renewables by themselves cannot power a data center. Why? Because take solar, for example. Solar panels can generate power about 6 hours in a day. Data centers need power 24/7.
Correct.
So even if there is solar generation happening, and solar generation is happening at a breakneck speed in the country, we still also need to push the grid capacity, because the way it's going to work is Control S, the example that I took, they are going to supply the solar energy to state electricity board and get the reliable 24/7 power from the state grid.
Correct.
So net metering, or some of those concepts that people talk about. So India especially should prioritize energy efficient data center build outs. And Refroid is the first and the only Indian company that has started building liquid cooling technologies for data centers about 3.5 years ago. We're just coming out of stealth mode, finished a lot of R&D, a lot of engineering. We've announced our first products earlier this year, announced another product a couple of weeks ago. We have another announcement coming in maybe about 8 weeks' time. First customers, hopefully this quarter.
Okay.
And it's completely make in India, right? Because there are very few hardware innovations that come out of India. There are very few deep tech innovations that come out of India. So that makes me proud as a CEO of Refroid that I'm able to head a company and inspire a wonderful team that I have to make this a completely make in India initiative. So broadly, there are two flavors in liquid cooling. I'll not spend too much time on this because it may or may not be relevant or interesting. One is called DCLC or cold plate. Other is called liquid immersion cooling. In DCLC, you're running a hollow plate on top of the hottest parts of the server, which is basically the CPUs and the GPUs, and you're water, deionized water or distilled water through that. And it takes the heat away, right? In liquid immersion cooling, you immerse the entire server into a dielectric bath. It's like think of a bathtub, and you're putting the entire server into that bathtub. Naturally, liquid immersion cooling is far more efficient than DCLC, because DCLC, there is still a part of the server that uses air for cooling.
Correct. So
So
you need a
remember,
combination of convection and conduction.
correct, absolutely right. So remember, I was talking about PUEs,
Hmm.
1.6, 1.65 PUEs. With DCLC, you get to 1.2. With
Fantastic.
liquid immersion cooling, you get to 1.05. That means
Wow.
to run 1 watt of compute, you just need 0.05 watts to cool that compute. It's a orders of magnitude difference, almost a paradigm shift when it comes to cooling, right? And so we also, interestingly, this dielectric fluid that I'm talking about, where you immerse the servers, traditionally chevrons or Shell, Castrol, Total, these are the companies that have made this dielectric. It's a synthetic hydrocarbon. We went and approached BPCL, collaborated with BPCL, and BPCL was very kind enough to open up their R&D facilities to us without either of us charging anything, to develop India's first make in India liquid coolant. So even from that perspective, we are putting India on the global map, right? This is a $20 billion market expected to be by 2030. And we hope that we will get at least a 5% share of that market and build $1 billion business at Refroid, right? We're also trying to work closely with MITI, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. They have been very, very open to having discussions around how they have a wonderful initiative called GPU as a service. I don't know how many of your viewers may have heard about it. Basically, GPUs are very expensive. If you want to buy a GPU server, the latest, greatest, it costs about $250,000. How many companies can afford, right? So what India AI, which is an organization under MIT, is doing is to provide per hour rental as low as 115 rupees or 200 rupees, depending on the configuration that you choose, so that small businesses, startups can actually access that GPU compute to build their own LLMs, large language models, or inference models once the LLMs become more prevalent, AI applications, right? All of which require large amounts of compute. So we have also been talking to MITI on how can we participate in this India AI initiative, as well as all the new government data center capacity that is coming out. How can we, with all the e-governance initiatives, how can we make that energy efficient and green, right? And given that we are building significant data center capacities in the private sector, can the government think of incentivizing these new data center operators to achieve low PUEs, giving them some tax breaks or concessions? Elsewhere in the world, starting in places like Taiwan, in Germany, in Saudi Arabia, for example, they have very strict laws on PUE. For example, in Germany, any new data center that's going to become operational after 2026 needs to have a PUE of under 1.3, or else you cannot go live. It may be a little bit harsh in the Indian environment, but because we want the data center capacity to be built without artificial constraints. Therefore, some form of incentives and green credits and things like that is something that we're suggesting to MITI. And MITI, as you know, is headed by very tech-savvy people. India AI is full of very tech-savvy people. India AI CEO is an IAS officer, but he's from IIT Kanpur, right? And the minister, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnaw himself is an IIT alumnus, right? So we have the right people in the government. And we hope it's not about Refroid, but it's about the data center industry for India. How do we build energy efficient data center capacity? How do we build more of that energy efficient data center capacity? How do we don't build semiconductors in India yet, not the CPUs and GPUs. Even the new semiconductor projects that are coming in will be in older process technologies and things to do with memory and packaging, right? We don't, we just started assembling servers in India, right? So power and cooling are the only two areas where we can make in India. And we hope at Refroid, we will be able to put India on the global DC infrastructure map. A lot of hard work ahead, very challenging, but that's what gets me to office 6 days a week and spend Sunday